My name is Chris Corbin. I'm a program manager for marine pollution and communications with the UNEP Cartagena Convention Secretariat based in Kingston, Jamaica. We are one of the regional co-executing agencies for the project, along with the GIZ and the Organization of American States. I'd like to begin by thanking my good colleague, our regional consultant and expert, David Wilk, who has helped moderate the first two English sessions. And I will be introducing this session as well as our facilitator. Before we begin, I wanted everyone to note that this session will be recorded and uploaded to our Crew Plus Academy website. And if you do not wish to be recorded or be part of the recording, I would sort of kindly request that you leave the session if that's not your wish. Today's training session in particular is session 3 of block 2 of the Crew Plus Academy. The focus will be on the governance in wastewater management and reuse, including the development and implementation of national policies, legislation, regulations, and management models. This training is offered through the Crew Plus Academy, which is a free platform that was established through the project that brings together all of our training initiatives in one place. The idea is to provide a space for knowledge sharing of water and sanitation solutions in the wider Caribbean region. As a reminder to participants, perhaps ones who are joining this as their first session, the Crew Plus project is a collaborative project funded by the Global Environmental Facility, the GEF, and co-implemented by the Inter-American Development Bank and the United Nations Environment Program. 18 countries of the wider Caribbean region are benefiting from the project, which offers innovative nature-based solutions to mitigate the effects of untreated wastewater on the environment and on public health. As we did last week, we are asking you as participants to participate in 2 surveys. The first survey, which will be done now, is our roll call, which you can now see on the screen as well as in the chat, and will be used for registration purposes. The second survey, an evaluation survey, will be done closer to the end of the session, and this will allow you to, again, register your full participation and will be the basis for your certificate of participation. I would like to just give a couple of minutes before we start to persons to fill out the survey, which is, as I mentioned, now available, the link available in the chat, and you will also see the link available on the screen. So we'll be back with you in another 2 minutes. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, colleagues, participants. I think we're now all set and ready to go. I'd like to very quickly introduce again our program facilitator and training expert, Senor Gustavo Heredia Dietes. Gustavo, as many of you now know, is a water and sanitation specialist with a specific background in engineering. He also has more than 25 years of experience in basic services in developing cities in several regions, including the Latin America and Caribbean region. So without any further delay, I would like to invite Gustavo. Welcome. Thank you again. And the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chris. Good morning, everyone. Happy to be here for session 3. For the ones of you who have not been present before in the previous sessions, session 1 was about the current state of affairs of wastewater in the world. We learned about very good reasons we have to treat the water and improve wastewater management. Then on session 2 last week, we talked about the how-to. We talked about different types of technologies that we use in order to treat wastewater and how we combine this set of different technologies in order to create treatment trains that will treat the wastewater. But it's not only about technologies. In order to develop sustainable sanitation services and wastewater treatment services, we have to work on the management side and the governance side, which is most important for the sustainability of these services. So today's session is basically, it will have 2 different parts. First, I will provide a short introduction to wastewater governance and management and standards. And then we will have a couple of presentations, one from IDB, International Development Bank, on a regional experience and a regional study on comparing different norms and legislations of different countries in the region. And then we will have the case of Trinidad and Tobago by the Ministry of Public Utilities of Trinidad and Tobago, and I will present a diagnostic that has been carried out in this country. With no further ado, we will start with the presentation. So wastewater governance refers to political, social, economic, and administrative systems in place that influence the collection, transport, treatment, and final disposal of wastewater. So wastewater governance is present along the entire sanitation chain that we saw in previous sessions. The main objective of wastewater governance is making sure that wastewater is not a threat to the public health, and to the environment. There are several functions related to wastewater governance, but we can mainly group these functions in 3 large groups. First, strategy level, then service provision level, and finally regulation level. At the strategy level, we have the policy formulation, lawmaking, and planning of service provision. This can happen at the national level or municipal level or state level, even at the community level, but we need this clear strategy taking place at all these levels. At the strategy level, it's important to clearly define the roles and the responsibilities of different actors. Then at the level of service provision, we have the allocation of resources so that those institutions with the mandate to provide services can make the necessary investments and the necessary mechanisms to ensure their financial sustainability over time. The most important function at this level is the proper coordination between government, civil society, and the private sector in relation to wastewater management. And in the next couple of slides, we will look at about the public sphere and the private sphere in more detail. Finally, the regulatory function ensures compliance with policies and regulations At this level, the effectiveness of plans and projects must be evaluated, and lessons learned can be fed back into both the management of the services and the improvement of policies and regulations. So once we implement the policies and the plans and the investments, the regulation function makes sure that all these standards are taking place and they are being complied with. And if not, we need this feedback to improve either the delivery of the services or modify the normative as necessary. We have seen in previous sessions this sanitation chain that starts with the household and ends up at the reuse or at the reuse or final disposition of treated wastewater. When we talk about conventional sewer treatment, for example, all this part of the sanitation chain is basically on the public sphere. So it's the utility that will collect the wastewater from the household, it will treat the wastewater, and finally reuse or dispose of the wastewater. I think there's an open microphone, Tizian, if you can check on that. Thank you. So all encircling this green circle is pretty much in the public sphere, but where the whole thing starts, where the service starts, is at the private sphere, at the household level, right? And also when we do reuse, we're incorporating other actors in the process. For example, if we do some reuse for irrigation in agriculture, then the farmer is a different actor that is coming into the scene and will be part of the sanitation chain. So in this case, we have private actors at the beginning and at the end of the chain. Also, we could have a private actor at the utility doing the treatment, right? But in most cases, this will be still regulated by the public sector, of course. Now, when we incorporate different types of solutions, non-conventional solutions, such as decentralized wastewater treatment plants, on-site solutions, or septic tanks, then in that case, we're incorporating even more private sector stakeholders. And this sometimes complicates things, especially at the regulation level, because when we have many small private sector actors, it's harder to regulate as compared as having just very few large utilities. So our policies, our norms and standards have to deal with these issues when we are planning for service delivery, and especially when we're planning on reuse. Now, this is the typical centralized solutions. They can be either centralized or distributed, but on the other extreme of decentralization, we have on-site solutions in which everything happens in one place. It might be a hospital, a school, or even a single household in which we will have the interface, the containment, the treatment, the discharge, infiltration, and reuse. The only link of the sanitation chain that we don't have here is collection and transport. Everything else is happening in one place. So all this is happening within the private sphere. But the infiltration of treated wastewater at the household level, or the on-site infiltration of wastewater, treated wastewater, of course, will affect underground water resources. So underground water resources, of course, is a public good, and the public is of public interest to protect these water resources. So even when we have on-site solutions, we still have participation of the public sphere in protecting health and the environment, specifically underground resources. Here are some success factors for good wastewater governance. First, we can find some opportunities to recover scarce water resources, nutrients, and energy through good reuse practices. Second, dialogue and coordination between different actors from management of services is vital for the success of sustainable wastewater management. Public-private partnerships can improve service delivery, efficiency, and encourage reuse activities. This is the kind of experience we have with farmers, for example, when we, or industry, when we can do reuse of treated wastewater in industrial processes, then we're encouraging this type of activity. It's a win-win situation in which the industry or the farmers can get water at a low cost, and in some cases with a plus, like nutrients, for example. And the utilities can treat the water at a less stringent level when we're going to reuse for specific activities. Finally, the role of government is crucial in creating enabling environments for good governance and also for effective implementation of the regulations. This is most evident at the local level, because we can create and develop all these national strategies and national normative frameworks for wastewater effluent, for example, to set the limits for discharge. But if we don't have the local government implementing this regulation at the local level, then nobody will comply with them. So it is the local level of the state or the local level of the government which has better conditions in order to make sure the normatives and the standards are complied with locally. So those were the 3 levels of governance. Next, we will see some regional experience on policy making, legislation, what the countries have done so far. And after that, I will present also some specific international guidelines on monitoring, evaluation, and for wastewater, specifically on reuse. So let's see these regional experiences. I would like to invite Amalia Palacios. She's an environmental engineer with a master's degree in public administration, and she has 11 years of professional experience working as an environmental engineer. In Argentina, Amalia supported the design and implementation of a $2.3 billion portfolio on water and sanitation projects. And since 2020, she's a consultant at the Water and Sanitation Division of the International Development Bank. She's based at the headquarters in Washington, D.C., and she has been supporting the design and implementation of all the activities related to IDB's Optimal Sanitation Initiative. So she will present this regional sanitation initiative to us, and also she will present the results of a very interesting comparison diagnostic on normative and regulations that they have performed very recently in the region. So welcome, Amalia, and the floor is yours. I'm going to unshare the screen so you can be yours. Welcome.
Perfect. Thank you. So I'll wait a minute. I think
we're doing very good.
Share the presentation.
Go ahead.
Ready. Are you being able to see my presentation?
Yes, we are.
Thank you. Okay, so well, thank you, Gustavo, and for the introduction. And as he said, I'm a consultant at the IDB working for the Water and Sanitation Division in headquarters. And unfortunately, the lead specialist responsible for this initiative couldn't join us today. However, I will try my best to reflect and present the valuable work that the IDB is doing regarding the water, but especially the sanitation sector, working with countries of the region to implement different relevant activities and programs. So having said that, I will briefly present the two main topics in the agenda. Right. Yes, here. The first, well, I'll talk about the Optimal Sanitation Initiative and its conceptual framework, and then I will present the results of the IADB study conducted on sanitation regulations. Therefore, first, to introduce this initiative, I consider we need to remember and understand that we need to move faster, and if we want to achieve the universal sanitation by 2030. According to IDB estimations, we are still lacking behind an investment of $15 billion per year in order to, if we want to achieve the SDGs by 2030. And although the countries have already made a significant progress towards this, we still need to do much more. The inequalities in the region are significant, and there is the main challenge is the urban segregation. We have the most unequal cities of the world, where 25% of the population lives in slums and informal settlements. 66% of the population in LAC have the lowest income payments in the cities, and 57% of this population are usually employed in the informal sector. Therefore, this situation regarding sanitation is often seen, and this is the biggest challenge that we have to provide access to this kind of populations, to this type of regions that are today they don't have access. So what we must change, we need to eliminate these social inequalities and provide them further access to and quality of this service. There is we need to consider the health and risks of for the population, especially in these times of pandemics, where sanitation was considered first an essential service that couldn't be interrupted in most of these countries. And we need to increase and invest further with further resources to build infrastructure. But it's not only about infrastructure, it's also about planning and design, as Gustavo said, to improve the governance of the sector. In this to this regard, we also need to diversify and better select the technologies that we use in order to more efficiently use the resources that we have, and that there are not many as well. And we also need to consider the level of quality of the watersheds. Therefore, in this regard, the IDB structure the Optimal Sanitation Initiative with calling for a new paradigm shift and a vision and focus on 4 strategic axes and divided in according to the people's needs and to access to sanitation, governance, technologies in innovation, and watersheds. In the axis of people, we are focusing basically on to address these inequalities. We are promoting activities on behavioral change to increase connectivity rates, in projects and to promote further employment and productive activities within the sanitation works that the IDB is currently financing. And in terms of watersheds, what we are trying to promote is a better planning, focusing on the sanitation critical health and of the population, and with better long-term comprehensive and staged solutions, with a circular vision, trying to promote further reuse and efficiencies in energy consumption and nutrient recovery, and of course considering climate change issues. We also have a strategic line to work on governance that it's related with the study that I will later talk about. That's basically trying to promote and introduce the sanitation in the agenda of the countries, since we are witnessing that there is still a lack of relevance and importance in this of this sector within the national policies, and we are trying to secure and stable and ensure stable financing for the sector, where not only the companies, the water and sanitation service providers would be able to sustain their services, but also to invest in further access for the population. And finally, we are working on the design and diversification and selection and management of technologies, which are also a huge challenge, and that if we want to achieve by 2030 the SDGs, of course, we need to try to innovate and find other kind of solutions that are not as similar as frequently used like the conventional technologies. For instance, condominiums and other types of developments that are being in place. Therefore, what the IDB is trying to achieve by 2025 at least, to invest in terms of resources, is to promote loans for infrastructure and strengthening in all countries of Latin America for $5,000 million, with other multilateral organizations and in coordination with other international institutions. And for this, we are gathering a $35 million of resources in non-reimbursable cooperation forms to finance all these activities that the Optimal Sanitation Initiative has identified. So one of these activities that we have been currently conducting has been the comparative study on the sanitation regulations, because, as Gustavo said, the governance is a key structure and an aspect that we need to improve further. A study was conducted to make a diagnosis and an analysis of the regulations in the 26 countries of the region. The study involved two phases. The phase one was for the 26 countries to identify all the sanitation-related regulation that was available on these countries. And as a second phase of the study, we conducted a comparative analysis on the sanitation regulations of 6 countries, trying to go further on the analysis and the details that we wanted to look for. The monitoring, the final purpose of this study, which is still going on and hasn't been finished, is in the near future to make a regulatory optimal sanitation framework where we may identify what is the ideal framework that countries should have in order to accordingly be able to achieve the SDGs goals by 2030. The phase 1 of the analysis involved the search of the legal framework, related documents, the constitution and national laws, the decrees, resolutions, and other policy guidelines and regulations, and the analysis of specific actions implemented in the different countries. This was a huge amount of work. 26 countries involves a lot of regulation and reading in terms of documents. However, we were successfully able to identify and validate most of the regulation that we find in the 26 countries and at the national level, of course. The analysis then consisted of doing grouping three main most significant topics, and within these topics or groups of topics, we analyzed 38 issues, aspects, or identified within the legislation certain particular things that we were aiming for. In terms of social aspects, we studied the universality of the service, whether it was considered or not a universal service within the country at the national level, the standard for particular areas, whether they were certain restrictions or possible limitations to conduct works in informal settlements and slums, how the decision-making in projects was done, if the projects or the service delivery had a gender focus, and whether the project activities and local development could be enabled around the sanitation legislation, the availability of information, if there were any kind of system in place to access to sectorial information, and the availability to access to that by the population. Then we also analyze the technical and environmental aspects related, or try not analyze, but identify the technical and environmental aspects regarding the user interface, the wastewater collection and disposal, the wastewater treatment, reuse, and final discharge. We all know that in terms of these 5 areas, the regulation is not directly and always related to sanitation only, but it's related with environmental institutions that regulate other sectors as well. Therefore, we only focus on the identification of those legal frameworks for further and later analyze in detail this kind of legislation. And third, and finally, the planning and economic and financial aspects of the legislation were identified, considering subsidies, if there were any type of information identified in each country regarding subsidies, the connectivity incentives that were in place, a structure of tariffs, and which kind of planning tools were in place. All these 38 aspects were summarized in a huge Excel matrix where we could that we shared with some countries in certain cases, and we were able to validate some of these results and identified whether any legal if any law or resolution was missing too. So during the phase, then after that analysis and pre-identification was done, we went to phase 2 of the study and performed and conducted a more detailed analysis of six identified countries and selected countries. And the scope was to go further in the gaps and similarities and differences between those countries. And for that, we conducted services, and we had 4 regional workshops to identify their barriers, opportunities, and lessons learned in the building of standards to advance to safe sanitation. We, as I said before, we did not assess or evaluate the effectiveness or the level of implementation. We only started to look and identify on the broad and challenging universe that is this legal framework related with sanitation. The countries selected for the detailed analysis in phase 2 were Mexico, El Salvador, Colombia, Bolivia, Jamaica, and Brazil. And these criteria for the country selection was defined according to the level of regulatory development, their geographical variability, and the relevance or possibility for other countries to learn from the regulations in place of these countries as well. So, for instance, in Brazil, we chose Brazil because of their advanced regulation regarding non-conventional systems, or in Colombia with the planning instruments, and so on. So basically, the results are still being analyzed and reviewed. However, we are already watching a different gaps and different levels of development of this governance structure related with the sector. Most of the countries, what we see, I mean, here in the analyzed countries and the different, I'm sorry that is not translated accordingly, the graph, but we are watching the social, the interface with the user, the evaluation and the discharge and recollection of wastewater and the treatment and whether they have reuse, etc. And what we see in green are the countries where we saw that there were certain kind of regulation published or developed on this regard. And what we are watching in red are the countries that we couldn't find any regulation in place regarding these different topics. So the biggest challenges are clearly the higher reds that we have. The social and user interfacing legislation is clearly not one of the main topics or highlights in the regulation. We have a lot of issues with the regulation for sludge and water reuse. We are still missing a lot of framework in this legal framework in this regard. And we also are not identifying many planning tools to execute projects in phases or to promote and implement unconventional solutions. I don't think I have time to go very with much detail on these results of the regulatory level. However, I mean, whatever we analyze is basically the different results that we were obtaining in this big matrix that we had, and we analyze each component, the detail, and the countries, what we saw and what we find. I should probably highlight the difficulties and the challenges that certain particular countries have, or we have to consider this legislation, that all their legislation and legal framework, since Argentina, Brazil, and Mexico, for instance, are federal countries or countries that have legislation according to their different states and provinces. And therefore, the scope of the analysis should have been conducted in more detailed way, or country by country. But all the documentation analyzed was basically online, and all people that, I mean, everyone that may access to this legislation. The phase 2 results with the comparative analysis, or the more detailed analysis of the 6 countries, show and demonstrated the different and the complexity of the development of the regulation between the 6 countries. As we may see, El Salvador is started in 1960 with the legislation in the sanitation sector, but we are still watching further developments and other gaps needed to fill in today, and the same with the rest of the countries. So it's not I mean, it's not as easy as one would expect to provide a general solution for each country, for every country. Each country should analyze and identify what are in detail what are the gaps and what are their particular problems. And however, this is a good way of comparing and maybe identifying lessons learned in other countries. Therefore, the objective of this study. What we also analyze, in particular in these 6 countries, were their sanitation plans and programs at the national level, and the way in which they were planning, especially considering the innovative planification that Colombia carry out, and we compared them. We compared the other ones. Then in wastewater discharge regulations, we also I started to identify and compare the kind of limits and parameters that are basically in place. Some of these countries are regulating only the water discharges, while other countries are considering the water quality of their watersheds and the quality of the rivers. Therefore, it's also another challenge to address and compare in general, or extract conclusions in general. But we are clearly able to see and highlight the the big gap in regulations and legislation that we are watching in terms of reuse of wastewater and sludges. We definitely are seeing that there is not a clear legal framework in terms to promote circular economy in the sector, and therefore it's an opportunity and a challenge to address in the future. Also, in terms of individual solutions, we were able to see that this is also a gap, an institutional gap, especially. Although most of countries have standards that define these kind of solutions, there is not a clear institutional framework or legislations that are regulating how much safe this service is being provided and how secure individual sanitations are being for not only for the people but for the environment as well. And in terms of non-conventional sewers, there is a lot to be done, of course, as well. Brazil, in this regard, has been it's the most advanced country, but we are still needing to replicate, or it's an opportunity to replicate. I consider other types of technical solutions, especially to address the urban challenge that we saw at the beginning of the presentation for informal and highly populated urban areas. So we were able to extract certain recommendations based on the feedback of the different countries that and the workshops that we conducted in terms of investment plans and discharge standards, reuse standards, and individual solutions, especially for these 6 countries that we further analyzed. But we are still need to work on this matter, and we will shortly publicate the results. And we would very much be interested in supporting and helping any country interested in reviewing or developing legal frameworks to improve governance. So thank you very much, and this is all on my behalf.
Thank you so much, Amalia. This is a huge work carried out by the IDB, the 36 countries, in such a detail of analysis. What calls my attention is that most countries have already implemented regulations on wastewater treatment, right? We have a very green column there, but not so much on reuse, right? So I think the big challenge is to develop standards for specific standards for reuse. If the participants have any questions for Amalia, you can type them in the chat, and so we can answer them. Also, there's a big difference between one country to another. There are some countries that when you see the horizontal green lines and the horizontal red lines, I like that.
Yeah, it's the difference is huge, and if you go further in detail reviewing each country, it's more and more unclear or confusing how these regulations are being implemented or being interpreted by each institution and each actors or stakeholder that needs to apply these regulations. Therefore, we still have a huge opportunity and work to be done on this regard.
Right, exactly. And another gap is at the interface level, right? And usually the interface level is also related to the on-site solutions. It's the beginning of the sanitation chain, so we also have a gap there. So if we want to promote the use of on-site solutions and decentralized solutions, we also have to work on that area, right?
Yes. definitely.
Okay, thank you so much. Great presentation. I appreciate your participation, Amalia.
Thank you, Gustavo. Very
Please stay
much.
with us. Next, I will make a short presentation on a study that was carried out for Trinidad and Tobago. Let me share my presentation. It's an assessment study. Here we go. Okay, so the assessment study for the development of reuse standards in Trinidad and Tobago. So this initiative is specifically on reuse standards. I have the names of the authors, of the consultants that have prepared this study, and I just made a shorter presentation that I have adapted for this occasion. Well, first of all, the water consumption in Trinidad and Tobago, as we compare it to Guyana and Grenada. In Trinidad and Tobago, the average consumption is 300 liters per capita per day, and that's two times as much as the average in Guyana. And we have 200 liters per capita per day in Grenada. So here we can see that on a per capita basis, Trinidad and Tobago is using, on an average, more water than these other two countries we're comparing to. Also, there's a lot of demand of water as compared to the available supply. Almost 1.2 million cubic meters per day, and the supply is only 1.05. So there's a big gap there that needs to be covered. The Trinidad and Tobago is not a water scarce country. However, the challenge arises in the management of the water resources in the face of competing demands. 64% of the population is served by septic tanks. So about 2/3 of the population is served by septic tanks. Only 30% of the population has access to centralized sewage, and 6% to pit latrines. And on the table on the right, you can see different areas of the country and the corresponding treatment facilities where the wastewater goes to be treated. So the Water and Sanitation Authority of Trinidad and Tobago is responsible for the collection, transmission, and treatment of wastewater in Trinidad and Tobago. There are 44 wastewater treatment plants owned by WASA and 18 contracted wastewater treatment facilities. So the coverage of wastewater treatment is around 17% as compared to peak demand. The unit cost of water production is $4.84 per cubic meter. This is interesting to compare to the cost of desalinated water, which is $9.95 per cubic meter. Yes, per cubic meter. And this is assuming 25% of non-revenue water. Considering the current production costs, regulated use of safely treated wastewater for non-potable users may be an economical feasible option. So here's the huge opportunity of reusing water if we take into account the very high cost of desalinating water. Wastewater reuse is a fairly new concept in Trinidad and Tobago, so it's not really widely acknowledged. According to their master plan, there are 30 sewer sheds. This means it's like watersheds, but for sewer to distribute the water in 30 different areas. The Water and Sanitation authorities recognize the following requirements. First, the integration of existing systems the integration of new developments, and the integration of unsewered areas. So those are the challenges they are facing to integrate all these different areas. There's an opportunity for businesses and consumers on commercial transfers of reclaimed water to the industrial, agricultural, and commercial sectors. There are policies, legislation, and regulation in place. Here are some of the examples. These are specifically reused, addressing the wastewater reuse cases. For example, we have the master plan policy. This is from 2008. There's also a policy for pollution control from 2009. The development of wastewater alternatives, also from 2009. All those three policies are from the Water and Sanitation Authority. Then from 2008, we have the National Integrated Water Resources Management Policy. Then upstream effluent management, national environmental policy, and finally a implementation strategy for the master plan. So this is a short list of policies, and also there are some regulations and legislation addressing wastewater reuse. Specifically, the Water and Sewer Act from 1994, which was updated in 2016, and the Environmental Management Act. And finally, the water pollution rules, which were amended in 2019. Nevertheless, there are some limitations to those current instruments, legal instruments. Mostly the wastewater reuse is not mainstream in national policies. There's ambiguity around mandated level of wastewater treatment. Where wastewater reuse is considered, details on governance systems and alternative sustainable financing are absent. And the main findings of this assessment are that the main contributors to water pollution are industrial facilities, wastewater, and failing domestic systems. There is ample recognition of a minimum set of core indicators that support the risk assessment across multiple reuse categories. So all these parameters that are used to monitor wastewater treatment are in place, and they are acknowledged by the utilities. So this is a good opportunity to use this current practice of monitoring according to these parameters for reuse. There are elements of existing policies that can contribute to the wastewater reuse sector. And finally, further development and expansion of the agricultural sector is expected to be limited unless wastewater reuse formalized. As we have seen, the demand of water exceeds the current supply, right? So unless we start reusing water, we're limiting the opportunities of agriculture activity. There's also some recommendations. The urgent need for reviewing existing tariffs. Public awareness is required to understand environmental and social benefits from proper wastewater management, treatment, and reuse. And the adoption process of private treatment plants must be formalized, and a clear process must be established. So this was a summary of the findings and the recommendations of this assessment. And next, we have a very special guest today, Mrs. Sarah Jade Govia. She's water sector specialist at the Ministry of Public Utilities in Trinidad and Tobago, where she designs policy solutions on technical, regulatory, and institutional challenges in the water and wastewater sectors. She has prepared several implementation strategies on future-proofing those sectors. Sarah Jade is also current president of the Caribbean Water and Wastewater Association, CWWA. She leads the association in lobbying Caribbean governments and development partners to build capacity to address their common water and waste challenges. Sarah Jade began her career in the water sector within the engineering stream and moved to water resource management. Her experience is concentrated on geological and engineering practices in designing water supply and wastewater systems, groundwater development, and environmental hydrology. Welcome to the session, Sarah Jade. I will stop sharing my screen so you can share yours. Thank you for being here. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Gustavo. And I think that my intervention is going to come in to explain in more detail the context behind the baseline assessment that you would have mentioned. And just to provide some background into Trinidad and Tobago a little bit further from what you've presented. You mentioned the national IWRM policy or National Integrated Water Resources Management Policy. And that is really the impetus for starting off this type of baseline assessment study that was done under the CRU Plus project. And really what the policy recognizes with relevance for wastewater reuse is that we, as a country, we have to optimize on all sources of water, and that includes stormwater as well as wastewater, which as the presentation, as the assessment found, we have very limited experience in. And one of the other things is that we also are looking at meeting the demand of non-potable water uses. And we're doing that particularly because in Trinidad and Tobago, we operate in in an environment that is low incentive for conservation. And that has a lot to do with our tariff, but most importantly, it has a lot to do with the fact that many of our customers at the water utility are not metered. So what we're looking at are two options, which is wastewater reuse to meet that non-potable water demand, as well as rainwater harvesting. And rainwater harvesting is important because it's a grassroots solution that is easy for households to do and can meet the demand in rural communities, rural and coastal communities. So that's really the policy context behind the study, behind the assessment. And what we're trying to achieve, particularly, which is the focus of one of our CRU Plus interventions, is development of wastewater reuse standards, which are voluntary. And the impetus for that is, I think, encompasses two things. Again, as I mentioned, the issue of reducing demand on the potable water supply network, as well as improving water quality. We have, in 2019, the government revised its water pollution rules, which now is more stringent and more in line with the polluter pays principle, because it now requires for effluent that does not meet the requirements and the parameters to be paid based on volumetric discharge, as well as contaminant loading. So we saw the development of wastewater reuse standards as a way to cover those both bases, reducing demand on the potable water supply system, as well as getting polluters to begin to adopt this sort of closed loop system and manage their water supply. And that follows the entire concept of adopting integrated water resources management, where all the elements of the supply chain of water are managed. And we have, I mean, as all of the countries in Latin America and the Caribbean know, that wastewater usually is on the back burner from water supply initiatives. So reuse is one of those things that can get us to start to meet demand. One of the important things from the presentation that Gustavo gave to understand is that while demand may seem higher than supply, the demand in this case incorporates the non-revenue water. So on average, we estimate that the utility loses between 100 to 120 million gallons per day, and that is equivalent to about 40 to 50% of their production. So it means that a lot of the work that we have to do is in optimizing the network and modernizing to reduce those losses. But what we did from a governance perspective is we understand that the role of government, and this is where the Ministry of Public Utilities comes in, is to enable to enable the sector. And this baseline assessment also incorporated a sort of market sounding in looking at which are the areas or sectors that have potential for reuse. And in this case, we found that reuse had the most potential, not on the municipal system, but in the private sector. So areas such as hotels, the service industry, agriculture, and manufacturing. So we're seeing the development of the reuse of the voluntary reuse standards as a push in that direction for the private sector, with impact on the municipal system and reducing that demand. One of the gray areas in terms of promoting reuse is on the economic side and the finance side. The utility is now embarking on a cost of service study to really pinpoint how much it costs them to treat wastewater. So we have the figures which Gustavo would have presented on treating water, on unit cost of water production. Those figures are actually in TT dollars, so it works out to be about 60 or 70 cents per cubic meter to produce water, and then our desalination bill is between $1 to $1.50 per cubic meter. And the desalination operators are private. So again, the issue of wastewater reuse comes up again. One of the areas that in Trinidad and Tobago we have where we're struggling with is the issue of regulation from the perspective of drinking water. And the study would have found that globally we looked at whether any countries were using wastewater reuse for potable demands. And I think the consultants did not find any. And that's one of the challenges that we have. How do we regulate drinking water? Right now, the utility are the ones that regulate themselves. So there's no sort of independent regulation of the quality of water, of potable water that gets to customers. Just to one of the final points is that Trinidad and Tobago did have a stint in investing in wastewater reuse, and that was for one of our major treatment plants, major wastewater treatment plants in Betham, that supplies or services the capital of the country and the suburban areas around the capital. And the idea was to install a reuse plant that would supply the industrial estate, which is located in the sort of central southern part of the island. So it was a distance away. And I think because of that distance, the project really never came off the ground. There was a lot of design work that happened, but the project really never came off the ground. So that was our sort of unsuccessful story with venturing into wastewater reuse. But what we found in the baseline assessment is that a lot of our golf courses are doing wastewater reuse, as well as some of the agricultural sector. But most importantly is that in an informal way, in Trinidad and Tobago, we do practice wastewater reuse, because one of our major water treatment plants that feeds from one of our major sources of water, which is the Caroni River, that actually has a lot of, it's an area that drains most of the populated parts of the country, of the island. And a lot of those parts, of course, discharge both treated and untreated sewage. So that particular, which is the main potable water treatment plant in the country, uses that water. So there's a sort of informal wastewater reuse. So any sensitization of wastewater reuse that we do across the country, we tend to use that example. But I mean, just to wrap up, I think that there's a lot of work to be done still, and we see the development of the wastewater reuse standards as the starting point for that. One of the things that we also want to address at the government level to to enable wastewater reuse to really get off the ground is public awareness and public sensitization of wastewater reuse. We don't really have a good handle on what are the public perceptions of wastewater reuse and whether they would use it for non-potable uses. And that's something that we haven't trained. So thank you very much to the team. Gustavo, back to you.
Thank you so much, Sarah Jade. Excellent comments and presentation. Thank you so much. I have a couple of questions, and also there's some questions in the chat. I wanted to ask you about regulating the private sector and also regulating on-site solutions. How do you see that? Is it a challenge? Is it because you also mentioned when the public sector regulates itself, right? So sometimes it uses a different standard for regulating itself than for regulating the private sector. How do you see that?
Well, in the wastewater sector in Trinidad, the utility is also the regulator for wastewater. So if you, as a private developer or as just a household owner, would like to install a wastewater system in your property, you of course go to the water utility. So what tends to happen is there are a lot of private developments that do their own wastewater treatment, and it is just in terms of regulation, for the most part, the design and installation is regulated by the utility. In terms of discharge, from a water quality perspective of the effluent, that is done by the environmental regulator. And one of the things I forgot to mention is that the environmental regulator, the utility, are working together, as well as the ministry, are working together to develop these standards. So really there is a gray area in terms of how households and private developers are regulated. And as the assessment found, one of the things that we're struggling with is the intention has been that when you get approval to put down a wastewater treatment plant privately, that the utility will eventually come in and take it over. And that is one of the things that we're challenged with, not having a system to take over those facilities. So it's part of the reason why we have a lot of untreated and malfunctioning systems throughout the country.
Great. And the other important issue is, and I see this problem in many other countries, when we start moving towards reuse. The question is who owns the waste, the treated wastewater? Sometimes that's not clear. How do you see this in Trinidad and Tobago? The ownership of the effluent.
Yeah. Well, the stint that I mentioned that we had as a country in reuse, which was that Betham wastewater reuse plant, that was actually done by our gas company. I'm not sure what was the logic at the time to give it to the gas company to do, but the idea really was that they would actually pay the utility a small fee for the treated wastewater effluent from the wastewater plant. And then after their reuse process, they then sell it, of course, at a higher cost. So I think that was I guess that's the sort of template that would have been put forward. But of course, there's money to be invested after you treat, or it's the wastewater reuse itself, or the reused water has a higher value than the treated effluent. But what we find in terms of water quality monitoring is that in any event, the treated effluent at the wastewater plant is already of a high quality. Right. So any sort of what we're hoping for is that there would not be a need to do additional treatment. So any sort of users can accept the water at the quality of the effluent. So that's why we're targeting, for the most part, the agricultural sector.
Right. Thank you so much. Janelle, do we have any questions on the chat maybe?
Yes. We have two questions from Mr. Benito. He's inquiring how or where can he get a copy of the policies and regulations? And is the reuse water free, or is there a fee?
Yeah. So the idea for this assessment is that the private sector and private actors would do their own reuse. So whatever is the cost for that treatment, they absorb it and they utilize the water in their operations. In terms of most of our policies are on the web, but unfortunately, in terms of the policies that were listed, we don't have them in one platform. So, you know, you can feel free to drop me an email, and I can share what I have with him. I'll just share my email in the chat.
Thank you.
Any other question, Janelle?
No, those were the only two questions. Thank Gustavo.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Sarah Jade, for being with us and sharing your experience. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bien, okay, so for the last part, as I mentioned before, I will share some international guidelines that are related to wastewater reuse specifically. Let me share my screen again. Okay, so each country has its own legislation, policy, and standards, but the guidelines I will show next are international guidelines. The one you're seeing now is from the World Health Organization. This is online and available to the public. I will also put a short document with all these links in the resources for this course after we finish the presentation. These World Health Organization guidelines for the safe use of wastewater, excrete, and gray water were published back in 2013. It's got 4 different volumes. And the one that is more related to what we have talked today is volume number 1, policy and regulatory aspects. The other 3 volumes, 2, 3, and 4, are more technical. They are more on the technical side, presenting parameters for wastewater treatment. Also, they go into detail on how to protect health of during reuse activities, the health of the farmers that are exposed to the irrigation water, or the crops, or the general public. Then we have a series of ISO guidelines. First, ISO 5667 on water quality. This standard has many parts, but these 3 parts, part 10, 13, and 15, are related to this session on wastewater treatment and reuse. So part 10 is guidance on sampling wastewater. We think this is very, very important, because when you take a sample of a wastewater treatment plant, you go and take a sample of the effluent, for example, you can get some results of a lab test one day, and if you were to take the same sample a couple of hours later, or a day later, or a day before, you might end up having totally different results. And sometimes we think those huge differences come from the lab test, as maybe a mistake from the lab, but the huge variations don't come from the lab. Most of the big variations come from how we sample the wastewater. It's not the same as getting a point sample, for example, just one simple sample, or getting a composite sample taken along many hours and mixed together, homogenized, and that type of sample would be more representative of the wastewater. So the way we sample water should be standard, and we should follow good practices, and part 10 of this guide is a very good tool for this. Part 13 is the same thing, but for sampling sludges, and part 15 is a guidance on the preservation and handling of sludge and sediment samples. This is also very important, because since we're talking about organic load, for example, in sludge. It's not the same taking making the lab test right now or in many hours. So how you handle the samples is also very important. ISO 16075 guidelines for treated wastewater for use in irrigation projects. This is a very, very important guideline. In a way, this course is based on these guidelines because we're covering different aspects, right, of a reuse project. So part one is the main framework for an irrigation project. Part two is development of the project itself. Part three talks about the components of the irrigation project. This is very technical. It talks about the pipes, the sprinklers, very specific and practical for actually designing and operating a reuse project for irrigation. Part four is on monitoring, and part five is specifically on disinfection of wastewater, of treated wastewater. So it talks about UV radiation for disinfection, chlorine, and ozone, basically, and other alternatives as well. ISO 2469 guidelines for water quality grade classification for water reuse. This is from 2018. Very practical. There are other ISO standards for classifying wastewater in a lot of detail, especially for industrial purposes, using a series of codes to determine specific qualities of wastewater. But these guidelines, the 2469 guidelines, are very practical because basically it helps you decide whether some treated wastewater effluent belongs to one of three main grades: high grade, medium grade, and fair grade. And these different grades are based on the potential of direct public access to the effluent or direct body contact to the effluent. No, so in high grade you have high potential for contact. Medium grade you have limited potential for direct public access or for body contact, and fair grade without potential, no direct access nor body contact. So just classifying in these three broad groups is a very practical and important tool to decide which kind of reuse we can or we cannot do with a specific effluent. And finally, the EPA, United States Environmental Protection Agency, this is one of the oldest. In 1980, the EPA published the first edition of the guidelines for wastewater reuse, which was updated in 1992, and then in 2004, and most recently in 2012. This latest edition offers new information and greater detail on a wide range of reuse applications and introduces new treatment concepts and technologies. The EPA provides a summary of key components to be taken into account when developing or modifying rules or regulations for water reuse. That's why I thought this standard was very important. These guidelines were very important for this session because they are totally related for developing rules and regulations for reclaimed water and monitoring the quality of treated wastewater. So that was what we have prepared for today. All the session materials can be found at the link you can see on the screen. And if you have any questions, or Janelle, if somebody has typed any questions in the chat box, we can answer them now.
Okay, thanks, Gustavo. A question was in the chat box, but it was Chris had responded to it. However, if there is time, we could invite our participants from Barbados. If there is time, to briefly just give their own experience regarding the policy and standards for wastewater reuse within their country.
Yes, thanks, Janelle, and just as a follow up on that, what we are wanting to do for participants is as much as possible give as many experiences with regard to the reuse of wastewater and some of the challenges as we've heard with the broader regional assessment from the IDB and then some of the experiences from Trinidad and Tobago. But we also have noted that Barbados has embarked on this for some time now in terms of how to address wastewater, treated wastewater reuse. They are a water scarce country and their size also very much dependent on tourism. So maybe with just the last few minutes, and I can also shorten my closing remarks, is that we could allow them to go through very briefly their experience. They have shared a short presentation that I am wondering myself if I could also share, or maybe we can give them presentation privileges. I'm not sure, but they have a very, very short slide that they could take us through. So maybe I could invite maybe Mr. Headley or Dr. Monza uh, and to use the opportunity as well, maybe to react to some of the earlier uh, uh, comments and presentations that were made in terms of how this has been approached by Barbados. Thanks so much. Over.
Good morning, everyone. Anthony Headley from Barbados. As Chris indicated, we will just provide just a very brief overview given the time, but we have prepared a few slides which I'm assuming that the organizers would be able to share. Can I confirm that everyone is hearing me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, we're hearing you.
All right. As Chris indicated, Barbados is a small island just east of the Caribbean chain. We are a water scarce country and classified by United Nations as a medium to high to medium development country. The main policies, this presentation has just four slides, a brief overview of the laws and policies, the institutions involved and the mechanisms currently being used with some indication of the way forward. The main legal instrument currently in place in Barbados is the Barbados Water Authorities Act, Cap 274A, and that act speaks specifically to the functions of the Barbados Water Authorities, and it outlines clearly the requirements and the things that they would have to do with respect to water and sewerage. Specifically, what I wanted to mention would be the aspects that speak to the design, construction of water and wastewater systems. And similar to Barbados, there's a clause that speaks to the authority being responsible for sewage treatment plants that are not part of the authority's current systems. The other important element within that legislation is the issue of research as well as dissemination of information to the public. Other supporting instruments include the Health Services Act and its regulations, Town Planning Act, which has been updated to the Planning and Development Act with some provisions to explicitly include environmental impact assessments. And recently, the update to the zoning policy, to the 2020 version entitled Water Protection and Land Use Zoning Policy. That is going to be supported by an explicit piece of legislation, the Barbados Water Authorities Act, Cap 274A, to be proclaimed. And that new act will bring the zoning policy into force. The importance of the zoning policy is that it was created in 1963 and it spoke to treatment of wastewater in the different zones. That zoning map for Barbados is going to be updated, or is updated in the new zoning policy, where we've made some amendments to the zones and we have provided some increased restrictions and increased protocols in the different areas with a view of improving wastewater discharges, as well as improving how we function and how we plan in general. The idea is not only to protect the groundwater, but also to protect the marine environment as well. And in terms of mechanisms, the main mechanism currently in place was the establishment of a ministerial committee and a technical committee. So the technical committee provides the insight for updating the policy for the ministers to make the decision. And all of the agencies are really presented on this slide, which will be shared. But it basically composed of the technical agencies as well as, for instance, Minister of Finance to address all of the issues. So you have all of the players, at least in the government end, sitting together on a weekly basis, discussing the issues, particularly what we are currently doing now in terms of upgrading of the existing wastewater treatment plants, and to bring into reality the cabinet decision on wastewater reuse. So we're going to be upgrading the plants and looking at wastewater reuse within the agricultural sector and potentially groundwater augmentation. In terms of the way forward, as I mentioned, we're implementing the cabinet decision dealing with water reuse, and a big part of that is looking at communications. So working with the Crew Plus project, we are looking at developing a communication strategy, as well as looking at establishing a water reuse fund. And that particular study under the Crew as well would be looking at the enabling environment for establishing this fund. The committee is currently working on improving collaboration with the private sector, sourcing funding from the different IFIs, international funding agencies, and that financing would be used to upgrade the current infrastructure to facilitate water reuse. That is our brief presentation. Thank you all for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Anthony, Mr. Headley, and colleagues from Barbados. And again, we thank the participants for indulging in just a few extra minutes to be able to share that experience. What, as has been said, all of the presentations and the recording will be uploaded to the Crew Plus Academy. But we also, as has been mentioned, want to compile a number of these resources that have been presented during the session today and make available through the Academy and through the Crew Plus website. So this will become a resource that we hope will continue to provide all of you with support, but also with all of the governments and the countries that are participating in the Crew Plus project. So very quickly, I would just like to thank everyone. Thank Gustavo very briefly. I want us to take just another minute or two to complete the second survey, the evaluation survey. The link to that is now being presented on the screen. We'll also be providing the link in the chat. So if you could just take very quickly a minute to do that, to complete the evaluation. But as we are doing that, in the interest of time, and we want to remain sort of very respectful to persons' time, I would like to, on behalf of the entire team, thank you, Gustavo, for again continuing to facilitate and provide your experience and your expertise in terms of guiding this training. We'd like to express a special appreciation to our invited speakers and to all of you as participants for your attendance, your questions, your your active participation. This series of training continues next week, Thursday, September 9th, for the English speaking participants. We would continue with module 4. And here we will continue to build on this discussion relating to wastewater reuse by looking at specific business models. How do we go about ensuring that our wastewater reuse interventions are financially sustainable? How can we encourage greater engagement by private sector and support by the general public? So that will continue next week. I will just maybe just stay on for another minute or so to allow people to complete their survey. But on behalf of the entire team, thank you all so much again for joining, and looking forward to see everyone next week, Thursday. So we'll stay open, but formally this brings to an end the session for today. Thank you so much.